Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Jeeves. Thank you, thank you.
Will that be all, sir?
Very kind of you, Jeeves. Now, let me ask you a question, Jeeves. The story tonight will be called Strychnine in the Soup. Is it strychnine or strychnine?
Strychnine, sir.
I think you're wrong.
Indeed, sir. Jeeves knows all.
I have a very crummy American dictionary which says strychnine, and I'm sure you're right for the English.
Be all, sir.
That will be all. Thank you, sir. Now, tonight's story, which starts out as a tragedy but ends up pretty well, is called Strychnine in the Soup. From the moment the draft stout entered the bar parlor of the Angler's Rest, it had been obvious that he was not his usual cheery self. His face was drawn and twisted, and he sat with bowed head in a distant corner by the window, contributing nothing to the conversation which, with Mr. Mulliner at its center, was in progress around the fire. From time to time, he heaved a hollow sigh. A sympathetic lemonade and angostura, putting down his glass, went across and laid a kindly hand on the sufferer's shoulder. "What is it, old man?" he asked. "Lost a friend?" "Worse," said the stout. "A mystery novel. Got halfway through it on the journey down here and left it in the train." "My nephew Cyril, the interior decorator," said Mr. Mulliner, "once did the very same thing. These mental lapses are not infrequent." "And now," proceeded the draft stout, "I'm going to have a sleepless night wondering who poisoned Sir Geoffrey Tuttle, Bart." "The Bart was poisoned, was he?" "You never said a truer word. Personally, I think it was the vicar who did him in. He was known to be interested in strange poisons." Mr. Mulliner smiled indulgently. "It was not the vicar," he said. "I happen to have read the Murglow Manor mystery. The guilty man was the plumber." "What plumber?" "The one who comes in chapter 2 to mend the shower bath. Sir Geoffrey had wronged his aunt in the year 96, so he fixed a snake in the nozzle of the shower bath with glue. And when Sir Geoffrey turned on the stream, the hot water melted the glue. This released the snake, which dropped through one of the holes, bit the baron in the leg, and disappeared down the waste pipe." "But that can't be right," said the draft stout. "Between chapter 2 and the murder, there was an interval of several days." "The plumber forgot his snake and had to go back for it," explained Mr. Mulliner. "I hope this revelation will prove sedative." "I feel a new man," said the draft stout. I'd have lain awake all night worrying about that murder." "I suppose you would. My nephew Cyril was just the same. Nothing in this modern life of ours," said Mr. Mulliner, taking a sip of his hot Scotch and lemon, "is more remarkable than the way in which the mystery novel has gripped the public. Your true enthusiast, deprived of his favorite reading, will stop at nothing in order to get it. He is like a victim of the drug habit when withheld from cocaine. My nephew Cyril, amazing the things we'll leave in trains of the small lager, bags, umbrellas, even stuffed chimpanzees occasionally, I've been told. I heard a story the other day." "My nephew Cyril," said Mr. Mulliner, "had a greater passion for mystery stories than anyone I have ever met. I attribute this to the fact that, like so many interior decorators, he was a fragile, delicate young fellow, extremely vulnerable to any ailment that happened to be going the rounds. Every time he caught mumps or influenza or German measles or the like, he occupied the period of convalescence in reading mystery stories. And as the appetite grows by what it feeds on, he had become, at the time at which this narrative opens, a confirmed addict. Not only did he devour every volume of this type on which he could lay his hands, but he was also to be found at any theatre which was offering the kind of drama where skinny arms come unexpectedly out of the chiffonier, and the audience feels a mild surprise if the lights stay on for 10 consecutive minutes. And it was during a performance of The Grey Vampire at the St. James that he found himself sitting next to Amelia Bassett, the girl whom he was to love with all the stored-up fervor of a man who had hitherto been inclined rather to edge away when in the presence of the other sex. He did not know her name was Amelia Bassett. He had never seen her before. All he knew was that at last he had met his fate, and for the whole of the first act he was pondering the problem of how he was to make her acquaintance. It was as the lights went up for the first intermission that he was aroused from his thoughts by a sharp pain in the right leg. He was just wondering whether it was gout or sciatica when, glancing down, he perceived that what had happened was that his neighbor, absorbed by the drama, had absent-mindedly collected a handful of his flesh and was twisting it in an ecstasy of excitement. It seemed to Cyril a good point d'appui. "Excuse me," he said. The girl turned. Her eyes were glowing, and the tip of her nose still quivered. "I beg your pardon?" "My leg," said Cyril. "Might I have it back? If you've finished with it." The girl looked down and started visibly. "Oh, I'm awfully sorry," she gasped. "Not at all," said Cyril. "Only too glad to have been of assistance. I got carried away." "You are evidently fond of mystery plays." "Oh, I love them." "So do I. And mystery novels?" "Oh, yes." "Have you read Blood on the Banisters?" "Oh, yes. I thought it was better than Severed Throats." "So did I," said Cyril. "Much better. Brighter murders, subtler detectives, crisper clues, better in every way." The two twin souls gazed into each other's eyes. There's no surer foundation for a beautiful friendship than mutual taste in literature. "My name is Amelia Bassett," said the girl. "Mine is Cyril Mulliner Bassett. Cyril Mulliner. Bassett," he frowned thoughtfully. "The name seems familiar." "Perhaps you have heard of my mother, Lady Bassett. She's a rather well-known big game hunter and explorer. She tramps through jungles and things. She's gone out to the lobby for a smoke. By the way," she hesitated, "if she finds us talking, will you remember that we met at the Polterwoods?" "I quite understand." "You see, Mother doesn't like people who talk to me without a formal introduction, and when Mother doesn't like anyone, she is so apt to hit them over the head with some hard instrument." "I see," said Cyril. "Like the human ape in Gore by the Gallon?" "Exactly," said the girl. "Tell me," she said, changing the subject, "if you were a millionaire, would you rather be stabbed in the back with a paper knife or found dead without a mark on you, staring with blank eyes at some appalling sight?" Cyril was about to reply when, looking past her, he found himself virtually in the latter position. A woman of extraordinary formidableness had lowered herself into the seat beyond and was scrutinizing him keenly through a tortoise-shell lorgnette. She reminded Cyril of Wallace Beery. "Friend of yours, Amelia?" "This is Mr. Mulliner, Mother. We met at the Polterwoods." "Ah," said Lady Bassett. She inspected Cyril through her lorgnette. "Mr. Mulliner," she said, "is a little like the chief of the Lower East Sea, though, of course, he was darker and had a ring through his nose. A dear good fellow," she continued reminiscently, "but inclined to become familiar under the influence of trade gin, I shot him in the leg. Why? Asked Cyril. He was not behaving like a gentleman. After taking your treatment, said Cyril, awed, I bet he could have written a book on etiquette. I believe he did, said Lady Bassett carelessly. You must come and call on us some afternoon, Mr. Mulliner. I'm in the telephone book. If you're interested in man-eating pumas, I can show you some nice heads. The curtain rose on Act 2, and Cyril returned to his thoughts. Love, he felt joyously, had come into his life at last. But then, so he had to admit, had Lady Bassett. There is, he reflected, always something. I will pass lightly over the period of Cyril's wooing. Suffice it to say that his progress was rapid. From the moment he told Amelia that he had once met Dorothy Sayers, he never looked back. And one afternoon, calling and finding that Lady Bassett was away in the country, he took the girl's hand in his and told his love. For a while, all was well. Amelia's reactions proved satisfactory to a degree. She checked up enthusiastically on his proposition. Falling into his arms, she admitted specifically that he was her dream man. Then came the jarring note. But it's no use, she said, her lovely eyes filling with tears. Mother will never give her consent. Why not? Said Cyril, stunned. What is it that she objects to about me? Well, I don't know, but she generally alludes to you as that pipsqueak. Pipsqueak, said Cyril. What is a pipsqueak? I'm not quite sure, but it's something Mother doesn't like very much. It's a pity she ever found that you were an interior decorator. An honorable profession, said Cyril a little stiffly. I know, but what she admires are men who have to do with the great open spaces. Well, I also design ornamental gardens. Yes, said the girl doubtfully, but still. And dash it, said Cyril indignantly, this isn't the Victorian age. All that business of Mother's consent went out 20 years ago. Yes, but no one told Mother. It's preposterous, cried Cyril. I never heard such rot. Let's just slip off and get married quietly and send her a picture postcard from Venice or somewhere with a cross and a "This is our room, wish you were with us" on it. The girl shuddered. She would be with us. You don't know Mother. The moment she got that picture postcard, she would come over to wherever we were and put you across her knee and spank you with a hairbrush. I don't think I could ever feel the same towards you if I saw you lying across Mother's knee being spanked by a hairbrush. It would spoil the honeymoon. Cyril frowned. But a man who has spent most of his life trying out a series of patent medicines is always an optimist. There is only one thing to be done, he said. I shall see your mother and try to make her listen to reason. Where is she now? She left this morning for a visit to the Winghams in Sussex. Excellent. I know the Winghams. In fact, I have a standing invitation to go and stay with them whenever I like. I'll send them a wire and push down this evening. I will oil up to your mother sedulously and try to correct her present unfavorable impression of me. Then, choosing my moment, I will shoot her the news. It may work, it may not, but at any rate I consider it a fair sporting venture. But you are so diffident, Cyril, so shrinking, so retiring and shy. How can you carry through such a task? Love will nerve me. Enough, do you think? Remember what Mother is. Wouldn't a good strong drink be more helpful? Cyril looked doubtful. My doctor has always forbidden me alcoholic stimulants. He says they increase the blood pressure. Well, when you meet Mother, you'll need all the blood pressure you can get. I really do advise you to fuel up a little before you see her. Yes, agreed Cyril, nodding thoughtfully. I think you're right. It shall be as you say. Good night, my angel one. Goodbye, Cyril, darling. You will think of me every minute while you're away? Every single minute. Well, practically every single minute. You see, I have just got Horatio Slingsby's latest book, Strychnine in the Soup. And I shall be dipping into that from time to time. But all the rest of the while, have you read it, by the way? Not yet. I had a copy, but Mother took it with her. Ah, well, if I am to catch a train that will get me to Berkeley for dinner, I must be going. Goodbye, sweetheart. And never forget that Gilbert Glendale in The Missing Toe won the girl he loved, in spite of being up against two mysterious stranglers and the entire Black Mustache gang. He kissed her fondly and went off to pack. Berkeley Towers, the country seat of Sir Mortimer and Lady Wingham, was 2 hours from London by train. Thinking of Amelia and reading the opening chapters of Horatio Slingsby's powerful story, Cyril found the journey pass rapidly. In fact, so preoccupied was he that it was only as the train started to draw out of Berkeley Regis Station that he realized where he was. He managed to hurl himself out onto the platform just in time. As he had taken the 5-7 express, stopping only at Glowberry Peveril, he arrived at Berkeley Towers in an hour, which enabled him not only to be on hand for dinner, but also to take part in the life-giving distribution of cocktails which preceded the meal. The house party, he perceived on entering the drawing room, was a small one. Besides Lady Bassett and himself, the only visitors were a nondescript couple of the name of Simpson and a tall, bronzed, handsome man with flashing eyes who, his hostess informed him in a whispered aside, was Lester Maple Durham, pronounced Mum, the explorer and big game hunter. Perhaps it was the oppressive sensation of being in the same room with two explorers and big game hunters that brought home to Cyril the mere sight of the need for following Amelia's advice as quickly as possible. But probably the mere sight of Lady Bassett alone would have been enough to make him break a lifelong abstinence. To her normal resemblance to Walter Berry, she appeared now to have added a distinct suggestion of Victor McLaughlin, and the spectacle was sufficient to send Cyril leaping toward the cocktail tray. After 3 rapid glasses, he felt a better and a braver man. And so lavishly did he irrigate the ensuing dinner with hock, sherry, champagne, old brandy, and port, that at the conclusion of the meal he was pleased to find that his diffidence had completely vanished. He rose from the table feeling equal to asking a dozen Lady Bassetts for their consent to marry a dozen daughters. In fact, as he confided to the butler, prodding him genially in the ribs as he spoke, if Lady Bassett attempted to put any dog on him, he would know what to do about it. He made no threats, he explained to the butler. He simply stated that he would know what to do about it. The butler said, "Very good, sir. Thank you, sir." And the incident closed. It had been Cyril's intention, feeling as he did, in this singularly uplifted, dominant frame of mind, to get hold of Amelia's mother and start oiling up to her immediately after dinner. But what with falling into a doze in the smoking room and then getting into an argument on theology with one of the underfoot men whom he met in the hall, he did not reach the drawing room until nearly 10:30, and he was annoyed on walking in with a merry cry of "Lady Bassett, call for Lady Bassett" on his lips, to discover that she had retired to her room. Had Cyril's mood been even slightly less elevated, this mood might have acted as a check on his enthusiasm. So generous, however, had been Sir Mortimer's hospitality that he merely nodded 11 times to indicate comprehension, and then, having ascertained that his quarry was roosting in the blue room, sped thither with a brief tally-ho. Arriving at the blue room, he banged heartily on the door and breezed in. He found Lady Bassett propped up with pillows. She was smoking a cigar and reading a book. And the book, Cyril saw with intense surprise and resentment, was none other than Horatio Slingsby's Strychnine in the Soup. The spectacle brought him to an abrupt halt. "Well, I'm dashed," he cried. "Well, I'm blowed. What do you mean by pinching my book?" Lady Bassett had lowered her cigar. Now she raised her eyebrows. "What are you doing in my room, Mr. Mulliner?" "It's a little hard," said Cyril, trembling with self-pity. "I go to enormous expense to buy detective stories, and no sooner is my back turned than people rush about the place, sneaking them." "This book belongs to my daughter Amelia." "Good old Amelia," said Cyril cordially, "one of the best. I borrowed it to read on the train. Now will you kindly tell me what you are doing in my room, Mr. Mulliner?" Cyril smote his forehead. "Of course, I remember now. It all comes back to me. She told me you had taken it. And what's more, I've suddenly recollected something which clears you completely. I was hustled and bustled at the end of the journey. I sprang to my feet, hurled the bags onto the platform, in a word, lost my head, and like a chump, I went and left my copy of Strychnine in the Soup on the train. Well, I can only apologize." "You can not only apologize. You can also tell me what you are doing in my room." "What I'm doing in your room?" "Exactly." "Ah," said Cyril, sitting down on the bed, "you may well ask." "I have asked 3 times. Cyril closed his eyes. For some reason, his mind seemed cloudy and not at its best. "If you are proposing to sleep here, Mr. Mulliner," said Lady Bassett, "tell me, and I shall know what to do about it." The phrase touched a chord in Cyril's memory. He recollected now his reasons for being where he was. Opening his eyes, he fixed them on her. "Lady Bassett," she said, "you are, I believe, an explorer?" "I am." "In the course of your explorations, you have wandered through many a jungle in many a distant land?" "I have." "Tell me, Lady Bassett," said Cyril keenly, "while making a pest of yourself to the denizens of those jungles, did you notice one thing? I allude to the fact that love is everywhere, aye, even in the jungle. Love, independent of bounds and frontiers of nationality and species, works its spell on every living thing, so that no matter whether an individual be a Congo native, an American songwriter, a jaguar, an armadillo, a bespoke tailor, or a tsetse fly, he will infallibly seek his mate. So why should an interior decorator and designer of ornamental gardens, I put this to you, Lady Bassett, "Mr. Mulliner," said his roommate, "you are blotto." Cyril waved his hand in a spacious gesture and fell off the bed. "Blotto I may be," he said, resuming his seat, "but nonetheless, argue as you will, you can't get away from the fact that I love your daughter Amelia." There was a tense pause. "What did you say?" said Lady Bassett. "When?" said Cyril absently. For he had fallen into a daydream and, as far as the intervening blankets would permit, was playing This Little Pig Went to Market with his companion's toes. "Did I hear you say, my daughter Amelia?" "Gray-eyed girl, medium height, sort of browny red hair," said Cyril, to assist her memory. "Dash it, you must know Amelia. She goes everywhere, and let me tell you something, Mrs. I've forgotten your name. We're going to be married if I can obtain her foul mother's consent. Speaking as an old friend, what would you say my chances were? Extremely slight. Eh? Seeing that I am Amelia's mother? Cyril blinked, genuinely surprised. What, so you are? Oh, I didn't recognize you. Have you been there all the time? I have. Suddenly, Cyril's gaze hardened. He drew himself up stiffly. What are you doing in my bed? He demanded. This is not your bed. Then whose is it? Mine. Cyril shrugged his shoulders helplessly. Well, it all looks very funny to me, he said. I suppose I must believe your story, but I repeat, I consider the whole thing odd, and I propose to institute very strict inquiries. I may tell you that I happen to know the ringleaders. I wish you a very hearty good night. It was perhaps an hour later that Cyril, who had been walking on the terrace in deep thought, repaired once more to the Blue Room in quest of information. Running over the details of the recent interview in his head, he had suddenly discovered that there was a point here which had not been satisfactorily cleared up. I say, he said. Lady Bassett looked up from her book, plainly annoyed. Have you no bedroom of your own, Mr. Mulliner? Oh, yes, said Cyril. They've bedded me out in the moat room, but there was something I wanted you to tell me. Well? Did you say I might or mightn't? Might or mightn't what? Marry Amelia. No, you may not. No? No. Oh, said Cyril, well, pip once more. It was a moody Cyril Mulliner who withdrew to the moat room. He now realized the position of affairs. The mother of the girl he loved refused to accept him as an eligible suitor. A dickens of a situation to be in, felt Cyril, somberly unshoeing himself. Then he brightened a little. His life, he reflected, might be wrecked, but he still had 2/3 of strychnine in the soup to read. At the moment when the train reached Berkeley Regis Station, Cyril had just got to the bit where Detective Inspector Mould looks through the half-open cellar door and, drawing in his breath with a sharp, hissing sound, recoils in horror. It was obviously going to be good. He was just about to proceed to the dressing table, where he presumed the footman had placed the book on unpacking his bag, when an icy stream seemed to flow down the center of his spine, and the room and its contents danced before him. Once more he remembered that he had left the volume in the train. He uttered an animal cry and tottered to a chair. The subject of bereavement is one that has often been treated powerfully by poets, who have run the whole gamut of the emotions while laying bare for us the agony of those who have lost parents, wives, children, gazelles, money, fame, dogs, cats, doves, sweethearts, horses, and even collar studs. But no poet yet has treated of the most poignant bereavement of all, that of a man halfway through a detective story who finds himself at bedtime without the book. Cyril did not care to think of the night that lay before him. Already his brain was lashing itself from side to side like a wounded snake as it sought for some explanation of Inspector Mould's strange behavior. Horatio Slingsby was an author who could be relied upon to keep faith with his public. He was not the sort of man to fob the reader off in the next chapter with the statement that what had made Inspector Mould look horrified was the fact that he had suddenly remembered that he had forgotten all about the letter his wife had given him to post. If looking through cellar doors disturbed a Slingsby detective, it was because a dismembered corpse lay there, or at least a severed hand. A soft moan as of something in torment escaped Cyril. What to do? Even a makeshift substitute for strychnine in the soup was beyond his reach. He knew so well what he would find if he went to the library in search of something to read. Sir Mortimer Wingham was heavy and country squirish. His wife affected strange religions. Their literature was in keeping with their tastes. In the library there would be books on Baha'ism, volumes in old leather of the Rural Encyclopedia, My 2 Sunny Years in Ceylon by the Reverend Orla Waterbury, but of anything that would interest Scotland Yard, of anything with a bit of blood in it and a corpse or two into which a fellow could get his teeth, not a trace. What then, coming right back to it, what to do? And suddenly, as if in answer to the question, came the solution. Electrified, he saw the way out. The hour was now well advanced. By this time, Lady Bassett must surely be asleep. Strychnine in the soup would be lying on the table beside her bed. All he had to do was creep in and grab it. The more he considered the idea, the better it looked. It was not as if he did not know the way to Lady Bassett's room, or the topography of it when he got there. It seemed to him as if most of his later life had been spent in Lady Bassett's room. He could find his way about it with his eyes shut. He hesitated no longer. Donning a dressing gown, he left his room and hurried along the passage. Pushing open the door of the blue room and closing it softly behind him, Cyril stood for a moment, full of those emotions which come to a man revisiting some long familiar spot. There the old room was, just the same as ever. How it all came back to him. The place was in darkness, but that did not deter him. He knew where the bed table was, and he made for it with stealthy steps. In the manner in which Cyril Mulliner advanced toward the bed table, there was much which would have reminded Lady Bassett, had she been an eyewitness, of the furtive prowl of the lesser iguanodon tracking its prey. In only one respect did Cyril and this creature of the wild differ in their technique. Iguanodons, and this applies not only to the lesser, but to the larger iguanodon, seldom, if ever, trip over cords on the floor and bring the lamps to which they are attached crashing to the floor like a ton of bricks. Cyril did. Scarcely had he snatched up the book and placed it in the pocket of his dressing gown when his foot became entangled in the trailing cord, and the lamp on the table leaped nimbly into the air, and to the accompaniment of a sound not unlike that made by 100 plates, coming apart simultaneously in the hands of 100 scullery maids, nosedived to the floor and became a total loss. At the same time, Lady Bassett, who had been chasing a bat out of the window, stepped in from the balcony and switched on the lights. To say that Cyril Mulliner was taken aback would be to understate the facts. Nothing like his recent misadventure had happened to him since his 11th year, when going surreptitiously to his mother's cupboard for jam, he had jerked 3 shelves down on his head, containing milk, butter, homemade preserves, pickles, cheese, eggs, caked and potted meat. His feelings on the present occasion closely paralleled that boyhood thrill. Lady Bassett also appeared somewhat discomposed. "You," she said. Cyril nodded, endeavoring the while to smile in a reassuring manner. "Hello," he said. His hostess's manner was now one of unmistakable displeasure. "Am I not to have a moment of privacy, Mr. Mulliner?" she asked severely. "I am, I trust, a broad-minded woman, but I cannot approve of this idea of communal bedrooms." Cyril made an effort to be conciliatory. "I do keep coming in, don't I?" he said. "You do," agreed Lady Bassett. Sir Mortimer informed me on learning that I had been given this room that it was supposed to be haunted. Had I known that it was haunted by you, Mr. Mulliner, I should have picked up and gone to the local inn. Cyril bowed his head. The censure, he could not but feel, was deserved. I admit, he said, that my conduct has been open to criticism. In extenuation, I can but plead my great love. This is no idle social call, Lady Bassett. I looked in because I wished to take up again this matter of my marrying your daughter, Amelia. You say I can't. Why can't I? Answer me that, Lady Bassett. I have other views for Amelia, said Lady Bassett stiffly. When my daughter gets married, it will be not to a spineless, invertebrate product of our modern hothouse civilization, but to a strong, upstanding, keen-eyed, two-fisted he-man of the open spaces. I have no wish to hurt your feelings, Mr. Mulliner, she continued more kindly, but you must admit that you are, when all is said and done, a pipsqueak. I deny it, cried Cyril warmly. I don't even know what a pipsqueak is. A pipsqueak is a man who has never seen the sun rise beyond the reaches of the lower Zambezi, who would not know what to do if faced by a charging rhinoceros. What, pray, would you do if faced by a charging rhinoceros, Mr. Mulliner? I am not likely, said Cyril, to move in the same social circles as charging rhinoceri. Or take another simple case, such as happens every day. Suppose you are crossing a rude bridge over a stream in equatorial Africa. You have been thinking of 100 trifles or in a reverie. From this you wake up to discover that in the branches overhead, a python is extending its fangs toward you. At the same time, you observe that at one end of the bridge is a crouching puma. At the other end are two headhunters, call them Pat and Mike, with poisoned blowpipes in their lips. Below, half hidden in the stream, is an alligator. What would you do in such a case, Mr. Mulliner? Cyril weighed the point. I should feel embarrassed, he had to admit. I should know where to look. Lady Bassett laughed a amused, scornful little laugh. Precisely. Such a situation would not, however, disturb Lester Mum. Lester Mum! The man who is to marry my daughter Amelia. He asked me for her hand shortly after dinner. Cyril reeled. The blow, falling so suddenly and unexpectedly, had made him feel boneless. And yet he felt he might have expected this. These explorers and big game hunters stick together. In such a situation, as I have outlined, Lester Mum would simply drop from the bridge, wait till the alligator made its rush, insert a stout stick between its jaws, and then hit in the eye with a spear, being careful to avoid its lashing tail. He would then drift downstream and land at some safer spot. That is the type of man I wish for as a son-in-law. Cyril left the room without a word. Not even the fact that he now had strychnine in the soup in his possession could cheer his mood of unrelieved blackness. Back in his room, he tossed the book moodily onto the bed and began to pace the floor. And he had scarcely completed 2 laps when the door opened. For an instant, when he heard the click of the latch, Cyril supposed that his visitor must be Lady Bassett, who, having put 2 and 2 together on discovering her loss, had come to demand her property back. And he cursed the rashness which had led him to fling it so carelessly upon the bed in full view. But it was not Lady Bassett. The intruder was Lester Mum, clad in a suit of pajamas which in their general color scheme reminded Cyril of a boudoir he had once recently decorated for a society poetess. He stood with folded arms, his keen eyes fixed menacingly on the young man. "Give me those jewels," said Lester Mum. Cyril was at a loss. "Jewels?" "Jewels." "What jewels?" Lester Mum tossed his head impatiently. "I don't know what jewels. They may be the Wingham pearls or the Bassett diamonds or the Simpson sapphires. I'm not sure which room it was I saw you coming out of." Cyril began to understand. "Oh, did you see me coming out of a room?" "I did. I heard a crash, and when I looked out, you were hurrying along the corridor." "I can explain everything," said Cyril. "I'd just been having a chat with Lady Bassett on a personal matter. Nothing to do with diamonds." "You're sure?" said Maple Durham. "Oh, rather," said Cyril. "We talked about rhinoceri and pythons and her daughter Amelia and alligators and all that sort of thing. And then I came away." Lester Mum seemed only half convinced. He said. "Well, if anything is missing in the morning, I shall know what to do about it." His eyes fell on the bed. "Hello," he said, with sudden animation. "Slingsley's latest. Well, I've been wanting to get a hold of this. I hear it's good. The Leeds Mercury says these gripping pages—" He turned to the door, and with a hideous pang of agony, Cyril perceived that it was plainly his intention to take the book with him. It was swinging lightly from a bronzed hand about the size of a medium ham. "Here!" he cried vehemently. Lester Mum turned. "Well?" "Oh, nothing," said Cyril. Just good night." He flung himself face downwards on the bed as the door closed, cursing himself for the craven cowardice which had kept him from snatching the book from the explorer. There had been a moment when he had almost nerved himself to the deed, but it was followed by another moment in which he had caught the other's eye. And it was as if he had found himself exchanging glances with Lady Bassett's charging rhinoceros. And now, thanks to this pusillanimity, he was once more strychnine in the surplice. How long Cyril lay there, a prey to the gloomiest thoughts, he could not have said. He was aroused from his meditations by the sound of the door opening again. Lady Bassett stood before him. It was plain that she was very deeply moved. In addition to resembling both Wallace Beery and Victor McLaughlin, she now had a distinct look of George Bancroft. She pointed a quivering finger at Cyril. "You hound!" she cried. "Give me that book." Cyril maintained his poise with a strong effort. "What book?" "The book you sneaked out of my room." "Has someone sneaked a book out of your room?" Cyril struck his forehead. "Great heavens!" he cried. "Mr. Mulliner," cried Lady Bassett coldly. "More book and less gibbering." Cyril raised a hand. "I know who's got your book. Lester Mum." "Don't be absurd." "He has, I tell you. As I was on my way to your room just now, I saw him coming out carrying something in a furtive manner. I remember wondering a bit at the time. He's in the clock room. If we pop along there now, we shall just catch him red-handed." Lady Bassett reflected. "It is impossible," she said at length. "He is incapable of such an act. Lester Mum is a man who once killed a lion with a sardine opener." "The very worst sort," said Cyril. "Ask anyone." "And he is engaged to my daughter." Lady Bassett paused. "Well, he won't be long if I find out that what you say is true. Come, Mr. Mulliner." Together the two passed down the silent passage. At the door of the clock room they paused. A light streamed from beneath it. Cyril pointed silently to this sinister evidence of reading in bed, and noted that his companion stiffened and said something to herself in an undertone, in what appeared to be some sort of native dialect. The next moment she had flung the door open and with a spring like that of a crouching zebu had leaped to the bed and wrenched the book from Lester Mum's hands. "So," said Lady Bassett. "So," said Cyril, feeling he could not do better than follow the lead of such a woman. "Hello," said Lester Durham, surprised. "Something the matter?" "So, it was you who stole my book." "Your book?" said Lester Mum. "I borrowed this from Mr. Mulliner there." "A likely story," said Cyril. "Lady Bassett is aware that I left my copy of Strychnine in the soup in the train." "Certainly," said Lady Bassett. "It is no use talking, young man. I have caught you with the goods. And let me tell you one thing that may be of interest. If you think that after a dastardly act like this you are going to marry Amelia, forget it." "Wipe it right out of your mind," said Cyril. But listen." "I will not listen. Come, Mr. Mulliner." She left the room, followed by Cyril. For some moments they walked in silence. "A merciful escape," said Cyril. "For whom?" "For Amelia. My gosh, think of her tied to a man like that. Must be a relief to you to feel that she's going to marry a respectable interior decorator." Lady Bassett halted. They were standing outside the moat room now. She looked at Cyril, her eyebrows raised. "Are you under the impression, Mr. Mulliner," she said, "that on the strength of what has happened, I intend to accept you as a son-in-law?" Cyril reeled. "Don't you?" "Certainly not." Something inside Cyril seemed to snap. Recklessness descended upon him. He became for a space a thing of courage and fire, like the African leopard in the mating season. "Oh," he said, and deftly whisking strychnine in the soup from his companion's hand, he darted into his room, banged the door, and bolted it. "Mr. Mulliner!" It was Lady Bassett's voice, coming pleadingly through the woodwork. It was plain that she was shaken to the core, and Cyril smiled sardonically. He was now in a position to dictate terms. "Give me that book, Mr. Mulliner." "Certainly not," said Cyril. "I intend to read it myself. I hear good reports of it on every side. The people's intelligence is as vigorous and absorbing." A low wail from the other side of the door answered him. "Of course," said Cyril suggestively. "If it were my future mother-in-law who were speaking, her word would naturally be law." There was a silence outside. "Very well," said Lady Bassett. "I may marry Aurelia?" "You may." Cyril unbolted the door. "Come, mother," he said, in a soft, kindly voice. "We will read it together down in the library." Lady Bassett was still shaken. "You will make Amelia a good husband?" "Grade A," Cyril assured her. "Well, even if you don't," said Lady Bassett resignedly, "I can't go to bed without that book. I had just got to the bit where Inspector Mold is trapped in the underground den of the faceless fiend." Cyril quivered. "Is there a faceless fiend?" "There are two faceless fiends," said Lady Bassett. "My gosh," said Cyril, "let's hurry." There was another story I had planned to read you, and I could read it still if we get time for it. Are you interested in hearing more? Anselm gets his chance. The summer Sunday was drawing to a close. Twilight had fallen on the little garden of the Angler's Rest, and the air was fragrant with the sweet scent of jasmine and tobacco plant. Stars were peeping out. Blackbirds sang drowsily in the shrubberies. Bats wheeled through the shadows, and a gentle breeze played fitfully among the hollyhocks. It was, in short, as a customer who had looked in for a gin and tonic rather happily put it, a nice evening. Nevertheless, to Mr. Mulliner and the group assembled in the bar parlour of the inn, there was a sense of something missing. It was due to the fact that Miss Postlethwaite, the efficient barmaid, was absent. Some 40 minutes had elapsed before she arrived and took over from the potboy. When she did, the quiet splendor of her costume and the devout manner in which she pulled the beer handle told her own story. "You've been to church," said a penetrating sherry in Angostura. Mrs. Postlethwaite said yes, she had, and it had been lovely. "Beautiful in every sense of the word," said Miss Postlethwaite, filling an order for a pint of bitter. "I do adore evening service in the summer. It sort of does something to you, what I mean, all that stilly hush and whatnot." "The vicar preached the sermon, I suppose," said Mr. Mulliner. "Yes," said Miss Postlethwaite, adding that it had been extremely moving. Mr. Mulliner took a thoughtful sip of his hot scotch and lemon. "The old story," he said, with a touch of sadness in his voice. "I do not know if you gentlemen were aware of it, but in the rural districts of England, vicars always preach the evening sermon during the summer months, and this causes a great deal of discontent to see among the curates. It exasperates the young fellows, and one can understand their feelings. As Miss Postlethwaite rightly says, there is something about the atmosphere of evensong in a village church that induces a receptive frame of mind in a congregation, and a preacher preaching under such conditions can scarcely fail to grip and stir. The curates withheld from so preaching naturally feel that they are being ground beneath the heel of an iron monopoly and chiseled out of their great chance." A whiskey and splash said he had never thought of that. "In that respect," said Mr. Mulliner, "you differ from my cousin Rupert's younger son, Anselm. He thought of it a great deal. He was the curate of the parish of Rising Maddock in Hampshire, and when he was not dreaming fondly of Myrtle Jellaby, niece of Sir Leopold Jellaby, OBE, the local squire, you would generally find him chafing at his victor's high-handed selfishness in always hogging the evening sermon from late in April until well on in September. He told me once that he made him feel like a caged skylark." "Why did he dream fondly of Myrtle Jellaby?" asked a stout and mild who was not very quick on the uptake. "Because he loved her, and she loved him. She had indeed consented to become his wife." "They were engaged," said the stout and mild, beginning to get it. Secretly. Anselm did not dare inform her uncle of the position of affairs, because all he had to marry on was his meagre stipend. He feared the wrath of that millionaire philatelist. "Millionaire what?" asked the Saul Bass. "Sir Leopold," explained Mr. Mulliner, "collected stamps." The small Bass said he had always thought that a philatelist was a man who was kind to animals. "No," said Mr. Mulliner, "a stamp collector, though many philatelists are, I believe, also kind to animals." Sir Leopold Jellaby had been devoted to this hobby for many years, ever since he had retired from business as a promoter of companies in the city of London. His collection was famous. "And Amelia didn't like to tell him about Myrtle?" asked the stout and mild. "No, as I say, he lacked the courage. He pursued instead the cautious policy of lying low and hoping for the best. And one bright summer day the happy ending seemed to have arrived. Myrtle calling at the vicarage at breakfast time found Anselm dancing round the table, in one hand a half-consumed piece of toast, in the other a letter, and learned from him that under the will of his late godfather, the recently deceased Mr. J.G. Beanstalk, he had benefited by an unexpected legacy, to wit, the stout stamp album, which now lay beside the marmalade dish. The information caused the girl's face to light up, continued Mr. Mulliner. A philatelist's niece, she knew how valuable these things could be. What's it worth? She asked eagerly. It is insured, I understand, for no less a sum than £5,000. Golly, indeed, assented Mulliner. Nice sugar, said Myrtle. Exceedingly nice, agreed Anselm. You must take care of it. Don't leave it lying about. We don't want somebody pinching it. A look of pain passed over Anselm's spiritual face. You are not suggesting that the vicar would stoop to such an act? I was thinking more, said Myrtle, of Joe Beamish. She was alluding to a member of her loved one's little flock, who had at one time been a fairly prosperous burglar. Seeing the light after about 16 prison sentences, he had given up his life work and now raised vegetables and sang in the choir. Old Joe is supposed to have reformed and got away from it all, but if you ask me, there's a lot of life in the old dog yet. If he gets to hear that there's a £5,000 stamp album collection lying around, I think you wrong our worthy Joe, darling. However, I will take precautions. I shall place the album in a drawer in the desk in the vicar's study. It is provided with a stout lock. And before doing so, I thought I might take it round and show it to your uncle. It is possible that he may feel disposed to make an offer for the collection. That's a thought, agreed Myrtle. Soak him good. I will assuredly miss no effort to that end, said Anselm. And kissing Myrtle fondly, he went about his parochial duties. It was towards evening that he called upon Sir Leopold and the kindly old squire, learning the nature of his errand and realizing that he had not come to make a touch on behalf of the church organ fund, lost the rather strained look which he had worn when his name was announced, and greeted him warmly. Stamps, yes, I'm always ready to add to my collection, provided that what I'm offered is of value and the right price reasonable. Had you any figure in mind for these of yours, Mr. My dear Mulliner? Anselm said he had been thinking of something in the neighborhood of £5,000, and Sir Leopold shook from stem to stern like a cat that has received half a brick in the short ribs. All his life, the suggestion that he should part with large sums of money had shocked him. Oh, he said, then seemed to master himself with a strong effort. Well, let me look at him. 10 minutes later, he had closed the volume and was eyeing Anselm compassionately. I'm afraid you must be prepared for bad news, my boy. A sickening feeling of apprehension gripped Anselm. You mean they're not valuable? Sir Leopold put the tips of his fingers together and leaned back in his chair in the rather pontifical manner which he had been accustomed to assume in the old days when addressing meetings of shareholders. The term valuable, my dear fellow, is a relative one. To some people, £5 would be a large sum. £5? That is what I am prepared to offer. Or, seeing that you are a personal friend, shall we say 10? But they're insured for 5,000. Sir Leopold shook his head with a half-smile. My dear Mulliner, if you knew as much about the vanity of stamp collectors, you would not set great store by that. Well, as I say, I don't mind giving you £10 for the lot. Think it over and let me know. On leaden feet, Anselm left the room. His hopes were shattered. He felt like a man who, chasing rainbows, has had one of them suddenly turn and bite him in the leg. Well, said Myrtle, who had been awaiting the result of the conference in the passage. Anselm broke the sad news. The girl was astounded. But you told me the thing was insured for? Anselm sighed. Your uncle appeared to attribute little or no importance to that. It seems that stamp collectors are in the habit of insuring their collections for fantastic sums out of a spirit of vanity. I intend, said Anselm broodingly, to preach a very strong sermon shortly on the subject of vanity. There was a silence. Ah, well, said Anselm, These things are no doubt sent to try us. It is by its accepting such blows in a meek and chastened spirit. Meek and chastened spirit, my left eyeball, cried Myrtle, who, like so many girls today, was apt to be unguarded in her speech. We've got to do something about this. But what? I'm not denying, said Anselm, that the shock has been a severe one, and I regret to confess that there was a moment when I was sorely tempted to utter one or two of the observations which I once heard the coach of my college boat at Oxford make to number one when he persisted in obtruding his abdomen as he swung his oar. It would have been wrong. But it would have unquestionably have relieved my... I know, cried Myrtle. Joe Beamish. Anselm stared at her. Joe Beamish? I don't understand you, dear. Use your bean, boy, use your bean. You remember what I told you. All you've got to do is let old Joe know where those stamps are, and he will take over from there. And there we shall be with our nice little claim for 5,000 of the best on the insurance company. Myrtle. It would be money for jam, the enthusiastic girl continued. Just so much velvet. Go and see Joe at once. Myrtle, I beg you, desist. You shock me inexpressibly. She gazed at him incredulously. You mean you won't do it? I could not even contemplate such a course. You won't unleash old Joe and set him acting for the best? Certainly not. Most decidedly not. 1,000 times no. But what's wrong with the idea? The whole project is ethically unsound. There was a pause. For a moment it seemed as if the girl was about to express her chagrin in an angry outburst. A frown darkened her brow, and she kicked petulantly at a passing beetle. Then she appeared to get the better of her emotion. Her face cleared, and she smiled at him tenderly, like a mother at her fractious child. Oh, all right, just as you say. Where are you off to now? I have a mother's meeting at 6. And I, said Myrtle, have got to take a few pints of soup to the deserving poor. I'd better set about it. Amazing the way these bimbos absorb soup like sponges. They walked together as far as the village hall. Anselm went in to meet the mothers. Myrtle, as soon as he was out of sight, turned and made her way to Joe Beamish's cozy cottage. The crooning of a hymn from within, showing that its owner was at home, she walked through its honeysuckle-covered porch. Well, Joe, old top, she said, how's everything? Joe Beamish was knitting a sock in the tiny living room, which smelled in equal proportions of mice, ex-burglars, and shag tobacco. And Myrtle, as her gaze fell upon his rugged features, felt her heart leap within her, like that of the poet Wordsworth, when beholding a rainbow in the sky. His altered circumstances had not changed the erstwhile porch climber's outward appearance. It remained that of one of those men for whom the police are always spreading dragnets. And Myrtle, eyeing him, had the feeling that in supposing that in this preeminent plug ugly, there still lurked something of the old Adam, she had called her shots correctly. For some minutes after her entry, the conversation was confined to neutral topics, the weather, the sock, and the mice behind the wainscoting. It was only when it turned to the decorations of the church for the forthcoming harvest festival, to which she learned her host would be in a position to contribute 2 cabbages and a pumpkin, that Myrtle saw her opportunity of approaching a more intimate subject. Mr. Mulliner will be pleased about that, she said. He's nuts on the Harvest Festival. Ah, said Joe Beamish, he's a good man, Mr. Mulliner. He's a lucky man, said Myrtle. Have you heard what's just happened to him? Some sort of deceased beanstalk has gone and left him 5,000 quid. Coo, is that right? Well, it comes to the same thing. An album of stamps that's worth 5,000 You know how valuable stamps are. Why, my uncle's collection's worth 10 times that. That's why we've got all those burglar alarms up at the hall. A rather twisted expression came into Joe Beamish's face. I've heard there's a lot of burglar alarms up at the hall, he said. But there aren't any at the vicarage, and between you and me, Joe, it's worrying me rather. Because, you see, that's where Mr. Mulliner's keeping his stamps. Ah, said Joe Beamish, speaking now with a thoughtful intonation. I told him he ought to keep them at his bank. Joe Beamish started. Whatever you say, I'd go and say a silly thing like that for, he said. It wasn't at all silly, said Myrtle warmly. It was just ordinary common sense. I don't consider those stamps are safe, left lying in a drawer in the desk in the vicar's study. That little room on the ground floor to the right of the front door, with its flimsy French windows that could so easily be forced with a chisel or something. They're locked up, of course, but what good are locks? I've seen these, and anybody could open them with a hairpin. I tell you, Joe, I'm worried. Joe Beamish bent over his socks, knitting and purling for a while in silence. When he spoke again, it was to talk of pumpkins and cabbages, and after that, for he was a man of limited means, of cabbages and pumpkins. Anselm Mulliner, meanwhile, was passing through a day of no little spiritual anguish. At the moment when it had been made, Myrtle's proposal had shaken him to his foundations. He had not felt so utterly unmanned since the evening when he had been giving young Willie Purvis a boxing lesson at the Lads' Club, and Willie, by a happy accident, had got home squarely on the button. This revelation of the character of the girl to whom he had given a curate's unspotted heart had stunned him. Myrtle, it seemed to him, appeared to have no notion whatever of the distinction between right and wrong. And while this would not have mattered, of course, had he been a gunman and she his prospective moll, it would have made a great deal of difference to one who hoped later on to become a vicar, and in such event would want his wife to look after the parish funds. He wondered what the prophet Isaiah would have had to say about it, had he been informed of her views on strategy and tactics. All through the afternoon and evening he continued to brood on the thing. At supper that night he was so distrait and preoccupied. He was distrait and preoccupied. Busy with his own reflections, he scarcely listened to the conversation of the Reverend Sidney Gooch, his vicar. And this was perhaps fortunate, for it was a Saturday, and the vicar, as was his custom at Saturday suppers, harped a good deal on the subject of the sermon, which he was proposing to give at evensong on the morrow. He said not once but many times that he confidently expected, if the fine weather held up, to knock his little flock cock-eyed. The Reverend Sidney was a fine, upstanding specimen of the muscular Christian, but somewhat deficient in tact. Towards nightfall, however, Anselm found a kindlier, mellower note creeping into his meditations. Possibly it was the excellent round of beef of which he had partaken, and the wholesome ale with which he had washed it down, that caused this softer mood. As he smoked his after-supper cigarette, he found himself beginning to relax in his austere attitude towards Myrtle's feminine weakness. He reminded himself that it must be placed to her credit that she had not been obdurate. On the contrary, the moment he had made plain his disapproval of her financial methods, conscience had awakened, her better self had prevailed, and she had abandoned her dubious schemes. That was much. Happy once more, he went to bed, and after dipping into a good book for half an hour, switched off the light and fell into a restful sleep. But it seemed to him that he had scarcely done so when he was awakened by loud noises. He sat up, listening. Something in the nature of a free-for-all appeared to be in progress in the lower part of the house. His knowledge of the vicarage's topography suggested to him that the noises were protruding from the study, and hastily donning a dressing gown, he made his way thither. The room was in darkness, but he found the switch, and turning on the light, perceived that the odd groaning sound which had greeted him as he approached the door proceeded from the Reverend Sidney Gooch. The vicar was sitting on the floor, a hand pressed to his left eye. "A burglar," he said, rising, "a beastly bounder of a burglar." "He has injured you, I fear," said Anselm commiseratingly. "Of course he has injured me," said the Reverend Sidney, with some testiness. "Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned?" Proverbs 6:27. "I heard a sound and came down and seized the fellow, and he struck me so violently that I was compelled to loosen my grip, and he made his escape through the window. Be so kind, Mulliner, as to look about and see if he has taken anything. There were some manuscript sermons which I should not care to lose." Anselm was standing beside the desk. He had to pause for a moment in order to control his voice. "The only object that appears to have been removed," he said, "is an album of stamps belonging to myself. The sermons are there, still there." "Bitter," said the vicar. "Bitter. I beg your pardon," said Anselm. He turned. His superior of the cloth was standing before a mirror, regarding himself in it with a rueful stare. "Bitter," he repeated. "I was thinking," he explained, "of the one I had planned to deliver at evensong tomorrow. A pippin, mother, in the deepest and truest sense, a pippin. I am not exaggerating when I say that I would have had them tearing up the pews. And now that dream is ended. I cannot possibly appear in the pulpit with a shiner like this. It would put the wrong ideas into the heads of the congregation, always in these rural communities, prone to place the worst construction on such disfigurements. Tomorrow, Mulliner, I shall be confined to my bed with a slight chill, and you will conduct both matins and evensong." "Bitter," said Reverend Sidney Gooch. "Bitter." Anselm did not speak. His heart was too full for words. In Anselm's deportment and behavior on the following morning, there was nothing to indicate that his soul was a maelstrom of seething emotions. Most curates who find themselves unexpectedly allowed to preach on Sunday evening in the summertime are like dogs let off the chain. They leap, they bound, they sing snatches of the more rollicking psalms. They rush about saying, good morning to everybody, and patting children on the head. Not so Anselm. He knew that only by conserving his nervous energies would he be able to give of his best when the great moment came. To those of the congregation who were still awake in the later stages of the service, his sermon at Matins seemed dull and colorless, and so it was. He had no intention of frittering away elegance on a morning sermon. He deliberately held himself back, concentrating every fiber of his being on the address which he was to deliver in the evening. He had had it by him for months. Every curate throughout the English countryside keeps tucked away among his effects a special sermon designed to prevent him being caught short if suddenly called upon to preach at evensong. And all through the afternoon he had remained closeted in his room, working upon it. He pruned, he polished, he searched the thesaurus for the telling adjective. By the time the church bells began to ring out over the fields and spinneys of rising mattock in the quiet gloaming, his masterpiece was perfected to the last comma. Feeling more like a volcano than a curate, Anselm Mulliner pinned together the sheets of manuscript and set forth. The conditions could not have been happier. By the end of the pre-sermon hymn, the twilight was far advanced, and through the door of the little church there poured the scent of trees and flowers. All was still save for the distant tinkling of sheep bells and the drowsy calling of rooks among the elms. With quiet confidence, Anselm mounted the pulpit steps. He had been sucking throat pastiles all day and saying me, me, me to himself in an undertone throughout the service, and he knew he would be in good voice. For an instant he paused and gazed about him. He was rejoiced to see that he was playing to absolute capacity. Every pew was full. There in the squire's high-backed stall were Sir Leopold Jollibee, OBE, with Myrtle at his side. There among the choir, looking indescribably foul in a surplice, sat Joe Beamish. There in their respective places were the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and all the others who made up the personnel of the congregation. With a little sigh of rapture, Anselm cleared his throat and gave out the simple text of brotherly love. I have been privileged, said Mr. Mulliner, to read the script of this sermon of Anselm's, and it must, I can see, have been extremely powerful. Even in manuscript form, without the added attraction of the young man's beautifully modulated tenor voice, one can clearly sense its magic. Beginning with a thoughtful excursus on brotherly love among the Hivites and the Hittites, it came down through the early Britons, the Middle Ages, and the spacious days of Queen Elizabeth to these modern times of ours, and it was here that Anselm Mulliner really let himself go. It was at this point, if one may employ the phrase, that he, in the best and most reverent spirit of the words, reached for the accelerator and stepped on it. Earnestly, in accents throbbing with emotion, he spoke of our duty to one another, of the task that lies clear before us all to make this a better and sweeter world for our fellows, of the joy that waits those who give no thought to self but strain every nerve to the square thing by one and all. And with each golden phrase he held his audience in an ever-tightening grip. Tradesmen who had been nodding somnolently woke up and sat with parted lips. Women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Choir boys who had been sucking acid drops swallowed them remorsefully and stopped shuffling their feet. Even at a morning service, such a sermon would have been a smash hit. Delivered in the gloaming with all its adventitious age to success, it was a riot. It was not immediately after the conclusion of the proceedings that Anselm was able to tear himself away from the crowd of admirers that surged round him in the vestry. There were church warders who wanted to shake his hand, other church wardens who insisted on smacking him on the back. One even asked for his autograph. But eventually he laughingly shook himself free and made his way back to the vicarage. And scarcely had he passed through the garden gate when something shot out at him from the scented darkness, and he found Myrtle Jollibee in his arms. "Anselm," she cried, "my wonder man, how ever did you do it? I never heard such a sermon in my life." "It got across, I think," said Anselm modestly. "It was terrific. Golly, when you admonish a congregation, it stays admonished. How you think of all these things beats me." "Oh, they come to one." "And another thing I can't understand is how you came to be preaching at all in the evening. I thought you told me the vicar always did." "The vicar?" began Anselm, has met with a slight, and then it suddenly occurred to him that in the excitement of being allowed to preach at evensong, he had quite forgotten to inform Myrtle of that other important happening, the theft of the stamp album. "A rather extraordinary thing occurred last night, darling," he said. The vicarage was puzzled. Myrtle was amazed. "Not really?" "Yes, a marauder broke in through the study window." "Well, fancy that. Did he take anything?" "He took my collection of stamps." Myrtle uttered a cry of ecstasy. "Then we collect." Anselm did not speak for a moment. I wonder. What do you mean you wonder? Of course we collect. Shoot the claim into the insurance people without a moment's delay. But have you reflected, dearest? Am I justified in doing as you suggest? Of course, why ever not? It seems to me a moot point. The collection, is worthless. Can I justly demand of this firm, the London and Midland Counties Aid and Benefit Association is its name, that they pay me $5,000 for an album of stamps that is without value? Of course you can. Old Beanstalk paid the premium, didn't he? That is true. Yes, I had forgotten that. It doesn't matter whether a thing's valuable or not. The point is what you insure it for. And it isn't as if it's going to hurt these mutual aid and benefit birds to brass up. It's sinful the amount of money those insurance companies have. Must be jolly bad for them, if you ask me. Anselm had not thought of that. Examining the point now, it seemed to him that Myrtle, with her woman's intuition, had rather gone to the root of the matter and touched the spot. Was there not, he asked himself, a great deal to be said for this theory of hers that insurance companies had much too much money and would be better, finer, more spiritual insurance companies if somebody came along occasionally and took a bit of the stuff off of them? Unquestionably there was. His doubts were removed. He saw now that it was not only a pleasure, but a duty to nick the London and Midland Counties Mutual Aid and Benefit Association for $5,000. It might prove to be the turning point in the lives of its board of directors. Very well, he said. I will send in the claim. Attaboy, and the instant we touch, we'll get married. Myrtle, Anselm. Governor, said the voice of Joe Beamish, at their side, could I have a word with you? They drew apart with a start and stared dumbly at the man. Governor, said Lord Joe Beamish, and it was plain from the thickness of his utterance that he was in the grip of some strong emotion. I want to thank you, Governor, for that there sermon of yours, that there wonderful sermon. Anselm smiled. He had recovered from the shock of hearing this sudden voice in the night. It was a nuisance, of course, to be interrupted like this at such a moment, but one must, he felt, be courteous to the fans. No doubt he would have to expect a lot of this sort of thing from now on. I am rejoiced that my poor effort should have elicited so striking an encomium. What's I? He says he's glad you likes it, said Myrtle a little irritably. She was not feeling her most amiable. A young girl who is nesting in the arms of the man she loves resents having cracksmen popping up through traps at her elbow. Ah, said Joe Beamish, enlightened. Yes, Governor, that was a sermon, that was. That was what I call a blinking sermon. Thank you, Joy, thank you. It is nice to feel that you were pleased. You're right, I was pleased, Governor. I've heard sermons in Pentonville, and I've heard sermons in Wilmot Scrubs, and I've heard sermons in Dartmoor, and very good sermons they were. But of all the sermons I've ever heard, I never heard one sermon that could touch this here sermon for class and pep. And Joe, said Myrtle. Yes, lady. Scram. Pardon, lady? Get out. Pop off. Buzz along. Can't you see you're not wanted? We're busy. My dear, said Anselm with gentle reproach, is not your manner a little peremptory? I would not have the honest fellow feel... Ah, interrupted Joe Beamish, and there was a suggestion of unshed tears in his voice. But I'm not an honest fellow, Governor. There, if you don't mind my saying so, no offence meant and none I hope taken, is where you make your bloomin' mistake. I'm a poor sinner and backslider and evildoer. Joe, said Myrtle, with a certain menacing calm. If you get a thick ear, always remember that you asked for it. The same applies to a lump the size of an egg on top of your ugly head through coming into violent contact with the knob of my parasol. Will you or will you not, she said, taking a firmer grip of the handle on of the weapon to which he had alluded. "Push off?" "Lie," said Joe Beamish, not without a certain rough dignity. "As soon as I've done what I come to do, I will withdraw. But first I got to do what I come to do. And what I come to do is hand back in a meek and contrite spirit this here album of stamps. What I snitched last night, never thinking that I was to hear that there wonderful sermon and see the light. But having heard that there wonderful sermon and seen the light, I now have great pleasure in doing what I come to do, namely," said Joe Beamish, thrusting the late J.G. Beanstalk stamp collection into Anselm's hand, "this here, lady, Governor, with these few words, open that you are in the pink as it leaves me at present, I will now withdraw." "Stop," said Anselm. Anselm's face was strangely contorted. He spoke with difficulty. "Joe." "Yes, Governor." "Joe, I would prefer, in a very real sense, I do so feel, in short, I would like you to keep this stamp album, Joe." The burglar shook his head. "No, Governor, it can't be done. When I think of that there wonderful sermon, all these beautiful things you said in that there wonderful sermon about the Evites and the Ittites and doing the right thing by the neighbours and helping as far as your new lives to spread sweetness and light throughout the world, I can't keep no albums which have come into my possession through getting in at other fellows' French windows on account of not having seen the light. It don't belong to me, not that album don't. And I now take much pleasure in handing it back with these few words. Good night, Governor. Good night, lady. Good night, all. I will now withdraw." His footsteps died away, and there was silence in the quiet garden. Both Anselm and Myrtle were busy with their thoughts. Once more through Anselm's mind there was racing that pithy address which the coach of his college boat had delivered when trying to do justice to the spectacle of Number 5's obtrusive stomach, while Myrtle on her side was endeavoring not to give utterance to a rough translation of something she had once heard a French taxi driver say to a gendarme during her finishing school days in Paris. Anselm was the first to speak. "This, dearest," he said, "calls for discussion. One does so feel that little or nothing would be accomplished without earnest thought and a frank round-table conference. Let us go indoors and thresh the whole matter out in as calm a spirit as we can achieve." He led the way to the study and seated himself moodily, his chin in his hands, his brow furrowed. A deep sigh escaped him. "I understand now," he said, "why it is that curates are not allowed to preach, not permitted to preach on Sunday evenings during the summer months. It is not safe. It is like exploding a bomb in a public place. It upsets existing conditions too violently. When I reflect that had our good vicar been but able to take evensong tonight, this distressing thing would have not have occurred. I find myself saying in the words of the prophet Hosea to the children of Abdullam, putting the prophet Hosea to one side for the moment and temporarily pigeonholing the children of Abdullam," interrupted Myrtle. "What are we going to do about this?" Anselm sighed again. "Alas, dearest, there you have me. I presume that it is no longer feasible to submit a claim to the London and Midland Counties Mutual Aid and Benefit Association. So we lose 5,000 of the best and brightest." Anselm winced, the lines deepening on his careworn face. "It is not an agreeable thing to contemplate, I agree. One had been looking on the sum as one's little nest egg. One did so want to see it safely in the bank, to be invested later in sound income-bearing securities. I've confessed to feeling a little vexed with Joe Beamish. I hope he chokes." "I would not go so far as that, darling," said Anselm with loving rebuke. "But I must admit that if I heard that he had tripped over a loose shoelace and sprained his ankle, it would, in the deepest and Tourist sense, be all right with me. I deplore the man's tactless impulsiveness. Officious is the word that springs to the lips. Myrtle was musing. Listen, she said, why not play a little joke on these London and Midland bozos? Why tell them you've got the stamps back? Why not sit back and sit tight and send in the claim and pouch their check? That would be a lot of fun. Again, for the second time in 2 days, Anselm found himself looking a little askance at his loved one. Then he reminded himself that she was scarcely to be blamed for her somewhat unconventional outlook. The niece of a prominent financier, she was perhaps entitled to be somewhat eccentric in her views. No doubt her earliest childhood memories were of coming down to dessert and hearing her elders discuss over the nuts and wine some burgeoning scheme for trimming the investors. He shook his head. I could hardly countenance such a policy, I fear. To me there seems something, I do not wish to hurt your feelings, dearest, but something almost dishonest about what you suggest. Besides, he added meditatively, when Joe Beamish handed back that album, he did it in the presence of witnesses. Witnesses? Yes, dearest. As he came into the house, I observed a shadowy figure. Who it was, I cannot say, but at this I feel convinced that this person, whoever he may have been, heard all. You're sure? Quite sure. He was standing beneath the cedar tree with an easy upshot. And, as you know, our worthy Beamish's voice is of a robust and carrying timbre. He broke off. Unable to restrain her pent-up feelings any longer, Myrtle Jellaby had uttered the words which the taxi driver had said to the gendarme, and there was that about them which might have rendered a tougher curate than Anselm temporarily incapable of speech. A throbbing silence followed the ejaculation, and during this silence there came to their ears from the garden, without, a curious sound. Hark, said Myrtle. They listened. What they heard was unmistakably a human being sobbing. Some fellow creature in trouble, said Anselm. Thank goodness, said Myrtle. Should we go and ascertain the sufferer's identity? Let's, said Myrtle. I have an idea it may be Joe Beamish, in which case what I'm going to do to him with my parasol will be nobody's business. But the mourner was not Joe Beamish, who had long since gone off to the Goose and Grasshopper. To Anselm, who was short-sighted, the figure leaning against the the cedar tree, shaking with uncontrollable sobs, was indistinct and unrecognizable. But Myrtle, keener-eyed, uttered a cry of surprise. Uncle! Uncle? Said Anselm, astonished. It is Uncle Leopold. Yes, said the O.B., choking down a groan and moving away from the tree. It is I. Is that Mulliner standing beside you, Myrtle? Yes. Mulliner, said Sir Leopold Jellaby, you find me in tears. And why am I in tears? Because, my dear Mulliner, I am still overwhelmed by that wonderful sermon of yours on brotherly love and our duty to our neighbors. Anselm began to wonder if ever a curate had had notices like these. Oh, thanks, he said, shuffling a foot. Awfully glad you liked it. Liked it, Mulliner, is a weak term. That sermon has revolutionized my entire outlook. It has made me a different man. I wonder, Mulliner, if you can find me a pen and ink inside the house? Pen and ink? Precisely. I wish to write you a check for £10,000 for that stamp collection of yours. 10,000? Come inside, said Myrtle. Come right in. You see, said Sir Leopold, as they led him to the study and plied him with many an eager inquiry as to whether he preferred a thick nib or a thin. When you showed me those stamps yesterday, I recognized their value immediately. They would fetch £5,000 anywhere, so I naturally told you they were worthless. It was one of those ordinary, routine business precautions which a man is bound to take. One of the first things I remember my dear father saying to me when he sent me out to battle with the world was, "Never give a sucker an evening break." And until now have always striven not to do so. But your sermon tonight has made me see that there is something higher and nobler than a code of business ethics. Shall I cross the checks? If you please. No, said Myrtle, make it open. Just as you say, my dear, you appear, said the kind old squire, smiling archly through his tears, to be showing considerable interest in the matter. Am I to infer? I love Anselm. We are engaged. Mulliner, is this so? Yes, said Anselm. I was meaning to tell you about that. Sir Leopold patted him on the shoulder. I could wish her no better husband. There is your check, Mulliner. The collection, as I say, is worth £5,000, but after that sermon I give you 10, freely. Anselm, like one in a dream, took the oblong slip of paper and put it in his pocket. Silently he handed the album to Sir Leopold. Thank you, said the latter. And now, my dear fellow, I think I shall have to ask you for the loan of a clean handkerchief. My own, as you see, is completely saturated. It was while Anselm was in his room, rummaging in the chest of drawers, that a light footstep caused him to turn. Myrtle was standing in the doorway, a finger on her lip. Anselm, she whispered, have you a fountain pen? Certainly, dearest. There should be one in this drawer. Yes, here it is. You wish me to write something? I wish you to write something. No, you wish to write something. I wish you to write something. Endorse that check here and now and give it to me, and I will motor to London tonight in my two-seater so as to be at the bank the moment it opens and deposit it. You see, I know Uncle Leopold. He might take it into his head, after he had slept on it and that sermon had worn off a bit, to phone and stop payment. You know how he feels about business precautions. This way we shall avoid all Ranny-Gazoo. Anselm kissed her fondly. You think of everything, dearest, he said. How right you are. One does so wish, does one not, to avoid Ranny-Gazoo. So anyway, there you have it.